Boaz Waruku is a strategy and policy advisor with Elimu Bora working group, and he's been here before. Boaz, good morning.
Good morning, Eric. Thank you. And I'm a fan of this show.
You know, you've sat here, you've listened to Arnold speak. Did you understand what Arnold was doing?
Arnold is a funny guy. He's the real package of the Kenyan youth currently. And indeed, because he understands everything, but he'll not tell you a thing.
That is a hate speech.
No, sorry.
Oh, no. You have that comment fits right into the discussion. And that's why we love Arnold. Because he introduces us to a certain realm of thinking that we often don't come across, and it's good for us. Yes.
Boaz, karibu sana to the situation.
Asante sana, Eric.
Yeah, we invited you earlier. Also, we had invited Mboko Milemba, who's an MP and the national chairman of KUPPET, because we'd like to mainstream the conversation about education, and particularly CBC and the transition into JSS. Now, you've seen the problems that have been happening, in terms of transitioning into JSS. Those in the private sector may not feel it, but those in the public sector are definitely feeling it. And even so, the Principal Secretary for Basic Education, Dr. Belio Kipsang, has said, we have had a slow start to the transition into JSS, into grade 7. The grade 7s reported to school. There were no teachers, so the TSC had to hire some 30,000 teachers. They've been hired, and now they've been deployed to the schools. Of course, 30,000 teachers versus about 25,000 or so schools that are JSS. That means that a school is receiving one teacher. If we were just to distribute only those to JSS. We also talked about the books, and the PS was saying last week is when some 15 million books were distributed to the schools for JSS. And he said, after we come out of the Easter break, we will then be at a good stead in terms of over 90% in terms of implementation of JSS. The question is, Boaz, I know you do a lot of groundwork on looking at these things. What have you been seeing on the ground with regards to transition to JSS?
Thank you, Eric, and thanks to City. It's for the first time, at least I'm here when he's around. And,
the last time you were here, he wasn't.
He wasn't around. And Arnold, I'm happy to meet you here. I think the issue at hand that we should actually be dealing with and tackling is the issue of planning first. There could be several. But because the planning, the way we do it within the Ministry of Education, I don't know whether it also happens in other sectors, but within the Ministry of Education, we plan in such a way that we don't seem to know exactly what to plan for. Why I say so is because we've adopted this language where every time, actually, we wait until the media, the ones to ask. And when the media ask, we have one very unique response next week. When that happens, it leaves you wondering whether these guys just realize that we are here at JSS. And so, for me, I say the issue of planning, we have to start with it too. Because I know I'm not going back to the discussions we've had previously, because when you're talking of even the teachers and all that, we did tackle a number of this. But when we are dealing with JSS student reporting, they reported on 30th of January 2023. And indeed, if you do remember, the students took a longer period at home for the schools to be reopened a little much later, because there was some planning going on to ensure that transition would take place successfully. And it was almost two months, because from December to 27th or 26th, when the other classes resume, and then we had JSS resuming or reporting, that is grade 7 reporting on 30th. At the time, we'd assumed that there was some planning going on. Planning when it was supposed to be done, all kinds of planning for teachers, induction of those teachers, planning for resources, financial planning, so that you deploy those in advance, planning for school management, because you restructure that. You knew that you are domiciling this now in the primary school, and you knew the incapacities or the deficits within those spaces, because within the primary schools, they were only receiving the free primary education fund, equivalent of about 1,250 per year. But then here you're having JSS, you've decreed that actually you'd be transmitting some 15,000 per student. So you need a number of things that needed to be planned, even the headships of those, So for me, when it appears, like only when we are prompted, then we come forth and say, we are doing that next week. And that next week is like a statement that I know trainers use in several trainings, but I've encountered it in a restaurant. For credit, come tomorrow. It's written there. The following day you appear there, it's still the writing which is there. In other words,
tomorrow.
That tomorrow never comes. It means then there are certain things which were not well planned. And when that happens, then you also go back then to how did we find ourselves here? Because it appears then there was completely, I don't want to say completely no planning, because some things was seemingly were being done. But it appears that there was low level of understanding and planning for this. So where did we come from, and how did we find ourselves here? Because we were coming to JSS transition to grade 7 after having had 6 years of continuous engagement and support to teaching our learners on the so-called CBC curriculum. And we were informed at the time that what informed that transition, why we started it that way, because there was a Professor Douglas Odhiambo report, I think you can remember that, which had indicated, among other things, there are so many things in that we want to design a system, which they now called, design the curriculum therein, that we want to design the system which would, enable all our children to be in school and to be learning. So we want to improve accessibility, we want to improve quality, and equity, all in other words, so that there was every corner of this country was to be touched. And every corner, I'm not only talking of the far-flung areas, but even within urban areas, you could be having isolated zones within urban areas. And so when it was indicated that all these corners would be reached so that accessibility is enhanced, then you said, okay, that sounds nice. But then once these people are in school, that some learning would be taking place, and learning that would now enable these children to understand matters, deal with issues of life, and appreciate and enjoy the learning, not really just being bombarded with drilling for exams and all that, too much exams, let's remove that and all that. We want practical people who would, after their learning cycle, they would actually be able to sustain themselves out there. So those are some of the things that then Professor Douglas Odhiambo was saying. I'm just picking a few, because if you are to discuss that on its own, it's a long, huge thing. So then you start wondering if that is what informed this. What would you be looking at? I normally talk of the parameters of quality. First, if you talk of transition, that you wanted then to have the 100% transition, but you have also to ensure that everybody is in school, that accessibility. We are being told then much later that, the transition that has taken place is just over 80%. In fact, that is being very generous. Yeah. We still don't know where some of our children are. And you are told, if you are also to assess this on the basis of, how was it happening before? The previous transitions, we were actually the ministry and the officials could literally be camping and combing the villages to ensure that children are in school. So there was almost 100% transition. So you are coming from there, and then here we are losing learners. We are losing them. So some of the things that then are getting lost are quite substantial. You come to quality, you're speaking as examples. You come to the quality, and the key parameter of quality is the teacher. A teacher who is well trained, motivated, properly inducted, because if you are doing transition and this teacher has also been trained elsewhere differently, then you have also to provide space for pedagogical kind of reorientation. But in this case, then first, the teachers are not even there. So don't even talk of the induction. By the time you're talking of the 30,000, it's the 30,000 that because there's a pronouncement. So pronouncement doesn't convert to reality immediately. It's not instant coffee. But to say, okay, 30,000 teachers would be there. But then, you've already mentioned it, and I think even last time he said, if you were to look at that as this general statistics actually cover a lot of things, because the statistics would tell you, when you talk of 30,000, somebody would think that is a lot.
Those are many teachers.
Many teachers, and almost all our schools would be covered. Then you realize that it is one teacher. In fact, I think there's a show where it's a city who talked of one and a half teachers. I think because I followed some.
We did the maths.
This is 1.5 teachers per school.
Yes.
So we're talking about all these issues, Boaz, the planning and the disruption that came with the Presidential Working Party on Education, that came with a new recommendation that actually domicile JSS in primary schools.
Yeah.
That must have thrown the system completely into a disarray, because previously the ministry was working with, they're going to transition into secondary school, and the secondary school teachers were prepared to welcome these children. Now the primary school teachers are being told, you're the ones who are going to handle JSS. That brings in the whole issue of you need to recruit more teachers, you need to have facilities ready for them. That must have cost a lot of headache to the officials of the Ministry of Education. However, if we just look at all these things and the teething problems and how far then they've come so far, are there grounds to say, let's throw away the baby with the bathwater? That, this JSS thing has just started off badly, and so therefore let's just cancel it all together, forget about CBC?
Eric, you're asking a difficult question. And also, in Kenya here, nowadays, when you ask such questions, you are setting somebody up for crucifixion. Easter is just gone. So please, let's be careful. Two, is this the first time you're having such a transition? No. So why then don't we look at when did this transition? How have we managed? It appears that we remain badly equipped, really badly prepared to undertake any kind of transition. The 844 transition from the system that preceded 844, if you remember, through the McKay Commission report, where these guys are supposed to be exploring how Kenya should establish a second university. That's the Moi University that was to be established. And all the materials that they've gathered, exchange, they've done benchmarking, all those things that they normally do. And then they come and say, for this university to function the way we think it should, we need to start from the bottom here with the primary, the secondary, and all that. And we need to transition to change that system to allow them to be more practical oriented and all that, So they pronounce themselves very well on a number of things, but something remained outstanding. Who did the mapping to see how the resources would be and how those resources would be deployed? Because when you do such transitions, it is always important. I think look at other countries that have attempted to do that, and they actually not just attempt, they prioritize education for a period. In Kenya, I would have thought that we should be prioritizing education and saying for us to undertake this transition, we require lots of resources. We require infrastructure to be provided. We require teachers to be developed, those kind of things. The 844 found people ill-prepared. I remember the first group of 844 people, I think they were building some traditional huts or things like that, You could see. And indeed, who wouldn't like that, primary school, when besides playing football and running around, then you find you can actually be in a workshop and...
you can take motifs and turn on joints.
Those things were... they would be stimulating.
Yeah.
But it was just like a trial.
Right.
Because then it was not sustained by ensuring that we provided those material, those equipment. At that time, I think because we were borrowing heavily from the Japan component, it would have been good to see even how you could directly liaise with that as a mentor of sorts and a support partner in the process. But we did not do that. So slowly, we started by saying, no. Music, okay, we can revert back to our traditional songs, but we'll not do music as something serious. Or art and craft, okay, those who have time, you can still go back there and see if you can even cut, use those saws and all that. And those who also can do all kinds of things, even the
Agriculture
painting.
can be done.
Agriculture can be done. The way we were digging or doing the farming in the teachers' gardens, behind gardens, those kind. So, in other words, a good idea that would have really taken us fairly far was trimmed down just because then we did not think holistically around how it should go on. Fast forward and fast track this to the CBC transition. That we have seen, in fact, a number of challenges with what this 844 is providing. And we are saying, no, for this one, let us involve Kenyans and start thinking, how do we develop or transform or transition ourselves from this system, which doesn't look to be meeting our demands and needs at the moment. How do we transition to make it better, improve, and actually be at the top? By the way, when they are saying that, Kenya is at the time considered to be among the top in terms of education system within the region and all that. In fact, even the products of its education system, you do a comparison within the region where it is, and you'll still find that you get some very, very strong and good characters, good people that are indeed there. But you say, let us improve this, because I think it is the late Michael Christopher Malo Kijana who used to say that a better idea, a good idea, he mentioned something about if you have a good idea, it should be able to give space for a better idea.
For a better one, yes.
Yes, I think I'm just struggling to paraphrase him. I haven't paraphrased him for long. So in that case, here we have a system. It's working, it was working, yes, but we think and we should be aspiring to be the best.
Yep.
We start saying that we need one that gives or enables our children to be highly competent. So we even integrate that name in the system, competency-based. And we say, for it to be done, actually, let's look at how it will be developed in a manner to stimulate the mind of the learners and all that. And so these people come up with this kind of curriculum, but it is done on paper. Then you realize nobody was planning for it to be actioned. So when it is done on paper,
But
those
then,
who thought about
Boaz,
this, yes,
there was actually planning happening and meetings and all that were taking place. There was even a PS who was appointed to spearhead CBC transition,
yes,
right? Professor Fatma. She was put in place to spearhead this
education
CBC
reform.
and make sure that this thing goes to fruition.
Yes.
Okay. So when we say that there was no planning, you have to ask ourselves, no, but we saw meetings, we saw reports, we saw...
Eric and I, before City comes in, you're mentioning Fatma, but you're not mentioning the CS, Amina Mohammed, who came and realized that planning was actually has deficiencies, and actually asked just for 1 year to streamline things. What happened to her? She read a statement in the morning, in the afternoon she was reading another statement, the opposite. So,
you know the question that is in my mind as soon as I'm listening to all this. Now I'm thinking like somebody who was an educator for a long time. Even when you want to improve, whether it's the curriculum or the education system, must you overhaul it completely? Is it not possible to remove elements that you think don't fit with the general plan that you have and then infuse this one? Would that not be easier for this transition process? Because when you overhaul it, or when you say you're overhauling it and starting it again, and then you look at the content of the curriculum and you find the differences aren't really there. Not really.
So it's not really an overhaul.
Not really. The discussion around the education has always been, we are now making it student-centered, but that has always been the discussion. Even at training, you are trained in certain units that are supposed to help you understand how a student-centered process should take place. I'm saying this because I was a teacher. I was a classroom teacher when this 844 system came in. And I was teaching the English language and literature. Okay? And I looked at the new book that they gave us for the English language. All they did was moved chapters around. That's it. What had been in chapter 1 in the book we're using was now chapter 4. They just moved them around. Now, when you realize that that's the case, you wonder, and even then, those chapters were supposed to flow, meaning you start teaching this, the next chapter ought to sort of like have a continuation with it, a continuum. That continuum was broken. So if you were the teacher and you hadn't read through it, you wouldn't know that.
But I'm hearing two different conversations, gentlemen. One is, on the CBC curriculum itself and the content and structure of it.
Yes.
But then there's a transition to grade 7. And what has happened to about 1 million children over the last 2 months since the 30th of January, like you said. And I think that's, for me, that my focus is on that. How did we end up with children in school for 2 months
with no learning taking place?
After 6 years of actually bringing them up towards this transition.
I think there was no problem with planning per se. The planning bit of it was done well. But what we forget a lot of times is that we separate financing, policy financing, public financing when we do planning. So that is why
it is supposed to be part of planning.
Unfortunately, it's the way we do things here is that the education sector people.
Then the planning can't be right.
And that is now you can go back and justify, or rather get my point when I said that any policy that is unimplementable is a bad policy. So moving on swiftly is that when the people in the education sector are planning, you find that the incidental actors, we're talking about treasury, specifically let's talk about treasury and parliament, because it's about a budget, are not properly part and parcel of this particular process. Of course, they will show in, they will be part and parcel of these things, but somehow when they go back from where they came from, probably the level of decision making, even for those who take part in this particular process, is not sufficient to inform.
So they don't have the buy-in.
It's not the buy-in. Everybody here agrees that when I talk about everybody,
you don't know what he's talking about.
City doesn't. When I talk about everybody, he refuses. So I want to talk about this. That
the moment everybody agrees, I'm going to say no even before you continue, because in these matters,
you could be right. Have you realized that when Arnold started, I was giving him a lot of space because I really want to understand where he's coming from.
And he hasn't finished.
He's not finished.
Let's give him time to finish.
Yeah, there's also an element when he's so assertive that some planning was taking place. I would really wish to get to that also.
Okay.
Yes.
You're saying that
when
the
you talk
gap
about
here
planning,
was in the planning.
In the planning bit of it, he's spoken about 6 years. Unless we are talking about those 6 years having been a retreat. But there was activity around planning. There was so much. There was too much reporting. There were too many meetings. There was activity around that. So we then presumed that there was sufficient planning around it. And of course, one presupposes that this planning also includes financing. Because what do we have as a problem today? 100% is a problem of financing. That the budget for the last 6 years has not worked actively, or rather has not been primed to meet those needs. So we agreed. One morning, Amina Mohammed showed up and told us this thing was not going to be done. Then she comes back immediately. Of course, somebody made a decision on phone and told her, you go back, and that's not what we're going to do. Which means somebody else had reached out to State House. Or there was some action somewhere.
Okay.
And sometimes people who've put in money, because a lot of the money that we talk about planning, that goes into planning might not even be...
Stay on point. So
might not be government money. So some people who had put in money over the time as people went for retreats, did the planning, the conferences and everything else, the quote unquote what he calls the curriculum review. He says that it's just mixing around those things. They didn't want their money going to waste, for example. This is again out there for anybody to come around that. So the problem here is financing.
So what is the financing problem?
Financing problem is, you're talking about 30,000. You've got about 30,000 schools, roughly.
Yeah, primary schools, yes.
Primary schools.
Yes.
So if you are hiring 30,000 teachers, so you guys did...
So one teacher per school.
So one teacher per school.
How's that going to
and we're assuming that JSS, so that is the head teacher of that particular JSS. Of course, I know that, so there's the management bit around that. So the primary schools did not have resources, for example, to build. I think we decided midway, just recently, that this was supposed to be in primary school. And it was a discussion that was made, declared,
with
almost a roadside declaration, that it will be domiciled in primary schools. So again, did the people within the primary school infrastructure have the money to prepare for these guys? Not in time.
Okay.
So this is a financing problem. You can go back and say, of course, the planning was bad. There wasn't so much. But then I will ask a question now that
financing problem is because of budget.
Right? No, it's not entirely budget, because what is a budget? A budget is simply what we expect to get and how we plan to spend it.
Exactly. So
does it feature in the budget even as an intention?
And that's what I'm saying. It was because it was not put in the budget that, 6 years minus, and counting, we are going to have children doing JSS. These children are going to need X number of extras.
Yes.
So let's start putting money into them so that we can have the infrastructure in place. Let's start putting money into the budget so that eventually we'll have infrastructure ready, teachers ready, and all those things. So planning, but it was not being supported by budget planning.
Education is a major economic pillar.
Yes.
In our BPS and the way we've structured our government. Okay. So, of course, there is still going to be an argument that education still takes the biggest budget when you look at the BPS. That argument is going to be there if people are going to talk about absolute numbers. But then for a country that is unable to transition 1,882 people into leadership 6 months after they went to an election, I'm trying to imagine how they are going to manage a third of the population. I don't want to look at the JSS students alone. I want to look at the children. That is almost a third of our population. So, did we rush this? And I tend to side with Sosion that we rushed this.
Okay. Boaz.
Thank you, Arnold. I think your attempt is helpful, though I would have really wished to get to the bottom of the planning that was taking place. And you're talking of support. As you're speaking, unfortunately, I only read interference. That some interference was taking place because there are some invested people who thought that this must go on and all that. So that's what I read. I may be wrong, but allow me to read that. I am also saying so is because one city talked about his experience at the 844 transition, particularly the books of literature, where chapters are being, pushed here and forth. You were almost talking about what was happening at CBC. You do remember that the first books arrived in schools and the teachers were looking at them and wondering what are these, because even in terms of just basic quality check, labeling, there was labels showing you that the nose is the ear and things like that, those kind of stuff. I'm using that, but saying what he was talking of planning was an interference. Why? Because those of us who have been in this education system and trying really to put forth suggestions and say, when you go it this way, you are not likely to get good results. We said, why should you be driven by, because for us it was an agreement, tenders had been signed with the book publishers and all that, it had to be given. And the tenders which were given was because that was a grant from the GP, Global Partnership for Education, through the World Bank and all, and that money had to be utilized. So maybe that's what I mean. I also then did not realize that when you say this, there are people who have invested. And
It's policypreneurship.
Yeah, those who would find that you are really interfering, but that you are obstructing, but they are the ones interfering too. The book publishers themselves, because these are real tenderpreneurs. You just imagine how you'd be able to stop them, and yet they have invested and even distributed. You cannot recall the per diems paid to those who were in the trainings and all that. Those ones are safe. You can still quantify. What am I saying is...
Let's do the news first, Boaz, and then we continue the conversation.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.